Okay. Fine. So we are live now as well. So thank you everybody for joining today's session. Just checking to make sure everything's looking fine. Thank you for joining today. My name is Paveen and I work at the University of Sheffield and Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals as Professor of Nursing and Professor of Gender-Based Violence. These sessions we do as part of the increasing research capacity among nurses, midwives, and AHPs specifically, but generally, kind of anybody who's interested in research as healthcare professionals in DBTH, but then we make them wider and open it up for colleagues around the area or country or wherever they come from. The beauty of doing online session is that you can join us from anywhere that you like. So thank you for joining us. My colleague Sarah also is jointly organizes these sessions. I'll let Sarah introduce herself first.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Gardner. I'm the Clinical Evidence Specialist for Doncaster Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals, and I've been working with Parveen to support these webinar sessions on different topics. I have a little bit to contribute, but today I'm here in a support capacity for Parveen.
Thank you, Sarah. So today's topic is sort of very popular. It's one of the things that many people ask quite a lot of questions, and what makes me an expert on the topic is that I work as I'm an editor-in-chief of International Nursing Review, which is one of the academic journals and official journals of International Council of Nurses. And one of the things which many people ask, not only healthcare professionals but other people also, is that how do you turn your thesis into a journal article? And thesis or dissertation, people use different languages depending on what do they call it. Like it could be a BSc nursing, BSc degree dissertation, or it could be a master's level dissertation, or it could be a PhD thesis, which a report, a research, or a project that people have conducted, and they would like to convert that into a journal article. So what I hope to do is discuss some of the generic principles around it, and then I think it works best if people's questions are answered. So I am thinking that all of you who are here, of course, are interested and invested into the topic, so probably have come with some questions. So I'll try and answer those questions as much as I can. So why do we do this? Why do people want to convert their thesis or dissertation into a journal article? Or sometimes it could be an assignment as well. There could be various reasons. One is that they would like to share the findings to various audience. They would like to learn how to write for publications and get into the habits of publications, or they're just interested in publication. They're using that kind of opportunity to see how that works. So basically learning to write for publication. Or there could be other reasons as well, but these are the two main things which I'm usually aware of, and that's what people want to do. But what people need to understand is there is a difference between a thesis and a journal article. Many people, what they do is they try and copy paste and kind of have the whole thing which they have written as a thesis into a journal article, and that doesn't always work, which then means that by the time they've submitted to a journal, it gets rejection, and then it gets several rejections, and people are not necessarily able to grasp as to why they're getting rejected and what they should do differently. So we need to understand the differences between a thesis or a dissertation and a journal article. So if we look at it, if we look at a thesis or dissertation, it's usually written for a different purpose. So both of these things are written for different audience and different purposes. Thesis is usually written to meet academic requirements for a degree program, be it undergraduate or postgraduate degree or PhD degree, whatever level that you talk about. It is reviewed by selected people. There are only few people who are involved in it. So if you're an undergraduate or master's students, that you will probably have your academic supervisor who has been supporting you with the process. You will have yourself and, few other colleagues who may have seen or helped you with improvement of the language, etc. They would see. If it's a PhD dissertation or thesis, it will be the PhD supervisory committee or supervisors. Practices are different in different parts of the world, but generally speaking, you can have anything between 2 to 4 people who are involved constantly as your supervisors or supervising committee. And they're the ones who read through it, look through it, and give you advice. Another person who looks into this type of thing is the examiner, the person who is marking the thesis. And that again usually is 1 or 2 people, depending on the level that you talk about. Thesis has chapters. It's divided into various different chapters so that the examiner or the person reading it can understand it and read it properly. And there is distinction between various parts of the document. It's usually lengthy. The word limit is usually generous. So if you could have anything, if it's an undergraduate dissertation, depending on what's the requirement of the degree, it could be anything between 6,000 to 10,000 words. If it's a master's level dissertation, it could be anything between 10,000 to 15,000 words. If it's a PhD or a doctoral level work, it could be anything between 70,000 to 200,000 words. So, there is a generous word limit that people can use. It allows you to demonstrate how you have achieved learning while going through the process. What have you learned? It's not only what have you learned, but what have you found and how have you learned and how have you made decisions. So there's a lot that you need to explain about why you did it, how you did it, to demonstrate that you understand the process. It has a table of content which helps people to navigate through the big document. Lengthy research of literature is there to help reader make sense of what the findings say about something. It has details of ethical approval procedures, description of the process that's been used for collection of the data, what kind of tools and other stuff has been used, and all the findings which they come out as a thesis. And verb and tenses may vary. So that's kind of a thesis sort of stuff. That's what you get. Now, if you compare it to a journal article, it's written for different audience. Okay, so it should meet journalistic standards and it's reviewed by blind reviewers. What that means is that once you've submitted it, it has to go through the selection of the editor would have to see, editorial assistant would have to see to make sure that, does that meet the requirement of meet the author's guidelines of the particular journal? Is that in the scope of the journal? Then if they and if the topic and how it is explained is written well, explains well, and once that thing is passed, then it has to go through the reviews, which are usually blind reviewers. They don't know who the authors are, but what they get is the work which is submitted to them, and they read through it and provide feedback. It doesn't have chapters, but it has different sections, and it has got word limit, which is usually very small. It used to be that journal articles was about 3,000 words, then it went to about 5,000 words, and now anything between 5,000 to 8,000 words, depending on which journal you're submitting and what type of research you're submitting. There's usually a manuscript format, so you usually see introduction, methods, findings or results, discussion and conclusion. That's a generic kind of format that you would normally see for most of the articles published in the journal. It provides a succinct research of literature. Succinct literature review doesn't have the whole comprehensive review is not provided, but very succinct to the point information is provided. It does describe ethical issues and how you've taken approval and everything else, but that usually is done in 1 or 2 sentences. And it does provide the tools and things that you have used, but again in few sentences, and it presents selected findings which you want to. It doesn't do the whole thing. There are few things that you need to present, and verb and tenses are usually fairly consistent. So even by looking at these 2 things, you can see that, how these are written are different. So therefore, there is no way that you can just copy and paste something from one thing to the other. Even at the word limit sort of stuff, the thesis, as if I've said, the The bigger one could be 200,000 words. And if you have got about 15,000 word thesis or something else like that, converting that into a 5,000, 7,000 word article is a hard task. So what do you do? So I think the first thing is about understanding these differences. And because if you understand these differences, then then you're prepared to make changes, and then you're prepared to do something that can help you. If you do not understand these differences, then what happens that people try and, as I say, extract the information from different places and put it into a document, and there is no flow, it doesn't read well, and submit, and that doesn't work. So if you understand that, then the first thing that I would like you to do is identify the best journal for your work. Okay. Check the available journal within your research field. Identify the journals that you want to that you want to publish in. It could be that you already know which journal you want to publish in. It could be that you already know what sort of journals publish the type of topic that you are working on, or you just have to do a little bit of research to identify that. With writing thesis, you would have done a basic literature review and literature search, which then exposes you a number of journals who publishes the type of work that you've done. So what I suggest is identify journals within that field which publish that topic, where you are relevant to your study and your topic is within the scope of those journals. Okay, so these are some of the things that you need to check. And once you have done that, I suggest also look at, think about who your audience is. That, if your topic is such that it is talking about a particular group of professionals, let's take the example of health, for instance. Is this something that is only talking to nurses and they will be the main audience? Is it only talking to AHPs, or within AHPs only physiotherapists or occupational therapists, or any particular group of therapists? Because if that's the case, then there is a different type of journal that you would have to explore or identify. Is it that it is quite generic and you have got all different types of professionals coming together, and then that also then has an implication of which journal you select for? The type of articles that the journal publish. So for example, Trauma, Violence and Abuse is a journal which only publishes review articles. So if you cannot send original articles, original research studies into that journal, because they are not going to publish it. And if you do that, you will be wasting your time and their time, and you'll be waiting for for at least 2-3 weeks to get answer. And basically the answer would be that we cannot accept your article. So it is important to also explore if the journal publishes the type of study that you want to publish in, and therefore it is relevant. You may also want to look at the journal's reputation, impact factor, etc. And I think all of these things are important. I guess it also depends on why you want to write. So impact factor, for example, if you're a novice writer, you may want to go for may not be that bugged about a good impact factor, but you just want to publish in something which is really useful, which is fine. If you are experienced in your field and you want to go for a very high quality, good impact factor journals, then you would look for those sorts of things. So I think these are some of the considerations that you have to think through and make. There's help available. There is things like Journal Finder, which can help you. These are search engines where you put the title of your study and perhaps the abstract of your study, and they suggest which journals are going to be appropriate for the type of work which they do. It's not 100% matching service, and it's not completely error-free. What it does is it gives you some information about what journal are there for your studies and which one you can choose from. So I usually suggest identify at least 3 journals which are suitable, or where your which fits the description of the study that you want to submit in, and it's suitable. Look at the word limit of each of those journals and try and find journals which has got similar word limit so that it's easier for you to change and submit from one to the other. Look for journals which use similar criteria or similar sort of referencing guidelines. Again, it will allow you to switch quickly if you have to go from one to the other, and you wouldn't have to change a lot. So those are the things that you need to consider, and then pick the one which gives you generous amount of words. That usually is helpful, because what it does is that it's easier to reduce the number of words from 10,000 to 8,000. But if you have to increase the number from 8,000 to 10,000, you may find it tricky. So go for a journal which gives you the more number or more quantity, allow you more word limit for your work than the ones which doesn't. Okay. Okay, so you've selected journal, you've identified journal, you're happy with that. Now the next thing is make sure you read instruction. Majority of the manuscripts get rejected from various different journals for the reason that the authors have not looked at the author's guidelines, and they have not prepared their manuscript in the journal's recommended structure and reference style. Most studies which get rejected, this is the number one cause for that. So make sure that you check journal's recommended structure and reference style, and make sure that you abide by it and you prepare your manuscripts according to that. Make sure that you read the author's guideline, and make sure that you follow those author's guidelines for the type of study that you are publishing. It may also be useful to read recently published articles relevant to your topic and relevant to your methodology, because then it allows you to see how other people have written this. You don't necessarily have to copy how they have done it, but I know that novice researchers, students, and many other people, they struggle to structure their work properly, and looking at one example helps them think through better to identify a pattern which they can use for their work. So it just makes life a little bit easier and quicker. And as I said earlier, choose about 3 journals. So that means that have a plan B. If you get rejected from journal number 1, where are you going to submit? And how, if you have thought through this earlier on at the start, once you get rejected, for instance, you can easily go to the second journal and submit it there. But if you haven't thought about those things earlier on, you will not be able to find that. The next thing that you need to do is shorten the length of your thesis. And I usually suggest that, you need to do this as a new document. Don't just try and copy and paste stuff from your thesis and think that's work. But maybe what's best is to develop an outline as to what is the message that you want to give to the audience. What is it that you want them to understand? And once you've made that clear in your head and on your paper, and you have developed an outline, it becomes easier to then find the relevant messages to add into it. Because simply copying and pasting from one thing to the other would not work, because these 2 pieces are written for different audiences, and therefore they speak a different language. Okay. And as it says, treat your thesis as a separate work. It's written for different audience, for different purpose, for different thing, whereas your journal article is different audience and different purpose, etc. Paraphrase, but do not distort meaning. So where you have to, like, for example, in thesis, you will have the liberty of having 3,000 words for your introduction, whereas for journal article, you'll probably have only 500 words. So you cannot simply pick things from one thing to the other. You have to paraphrase and you have to write in a different way. So try and do that. Try and do that in a way that doesn't distort your meaning. Select and repurpose part of your thesis, which is important. Pick the information which is there, which would be useful for your journal article. But again, don't just get everything else. You may want, you may see this helpful to write an abstract first, because what it does is that it usually allows you to think through the central message that you want to give it. It gives you that heading of different sections of the journal article that you're aiming to write. Abstracts are identified as window to an article. So they give you the glimpse of the article and what's written in there. So therefore, having those headings and writing in the abstracts would help you a lot in terms of understanding what key message that you want to convey to the audience and how to do it. Okay. Modify introduction, combine research question of focusing on just one of the articles. So you may have more than one research question when for your thesis or for your dissertation. You need to look into the introduction and you need to modify the introduction to serve the journal article, but then you also need to make a decision if you're going to focus on all those questions for your paper, or could you be focusing on 1 or 2 questions of which you've covered in your thesis, and you want to do that in dissertation, in the journal article. Here, an important point comes in where people think that if they are going to pick one question, they're going to write another paper on something else. You can do so, like usually PhD thesis and sometimes master's thesis have more than one message, and you can easily write more than one paper for different journals, but you need to understand that it should be unique, it should be different, and it should give a different key message. If it's the same thing but said it slightly differently, you may not want to do that. So therefore, thinking about what your focus would be is really important, and which then helps you modify your introduction and discussion according to the question that you want to answer in your journal article. Okay. Use previously published. I think we have discussed this again. Look at at least 2 or 3 papers published in the same topic or in the same methodology in your target journals, because that allows you to see the current state of the literature, how they have written, what sort of language they have used, what sort of headings they have used, and it helps you write better. Check the method section. Usually in thesis, your method section is quite long. It's nearly about 4,000 to 5,000 words, depending on which level of writing it is. But in journal, you probably would only get anything between 500 to 1,000 words. Okay, so you need to reduce the section quite significantly. You don't necessarily have to provide rationale or describe how you have achieved that learning into the journal article. You just have to state how you did things that you did and sometimes why you did it. Okay, so shorten the length of your thesis and add information into appropriate sections. So just maybe copy and paste in there, and then try and kind of sorting it out and reducing it the number of words so that it's easier to write. Start off with method section, then develop your finding section. So usually we suggest for any journal article that you write, it's usually useful to start with the method section, because that's something that you have already done. It's easier to shrink that section into the information that you want to present. It's the factual information that you have already know, and things that you've already conducted. So that helps in terms of writing it. And once you have written that section, it gives you that sense of achievement that you've done something. So there are various purposes of writing a method section first. Once you've done that, and my slides are stuck, then write your finding section. Again, when you're writing a journal article, after methods, writing the finding section is perhaps the easiest one, because can I just ask you to please mute yourself? If you're not talking to me. So in terms of writing finding sections, again, when you are reducing the word count from your thesis to findings, the same principle apply. You need to shorten the length, but you need to make sure that your meanings are not distorted, and you are referring to the research question which is being published or which you want to convey into the research articles. You also need to look at relevant tables and figures and see if these can be converted into the journal article and which ones you need. Thesis provides you with a lot of place. You can have as many tables as you like, as many figures as you like, whereas journal articles usually have limits. So you have to pick and choose which tables and figures are going to go into. And do you need to put tables and figures as they are, or do you need to merge them together to have more space, or divide them, or things like that? You have to make those decisions, looking at the requirement of the journal, looking at the author's guidelines, which provide you with that information, and looking at the key message that you want to convey to people. Okay. If it's a qualitative research, you may want to add quotes. You may need more than one quote, but you don't want to. Again, we see many studies where people have provided quote one after the other, 2 or 3 quotes without much explanation or context around it, and that doesn't help. because that doesn't help the reader to understand why you're saying it and what you're saying it. So make sure there's a good balance of the information provided about the context that you're explaining, and that context and that explanation is supported by appropriate quotes, which basically help reader to contextualize the findings, to contextualize the information, rather than only quotes from different individuals and provided without any context, which it may not always help. It makes sense to you because you have, as an author, because you have got quite a lot of background information in your head. You're the one who have done this study, so it just makes sense to you. But for a new reader who doesn't know that context, it doesn't help. Then the next section that you should write is discussion and introduction. Modify it according to meet the needs of the journal article that you're writing. Make sure that it is clear, concise, and is written in the style of the journal with regards to referencing, with regards to how the language it's used, and with regards to the information that you want to convey and provide, depending on your topic. Doing discussion and introduction both at the same time helps, because then you can make sure that you're using similar literature and current literature to support both of those things. You don't normally have the liberty to have as many references as you like in a journal article. Some journal article limit the number of references to anything between 25. If you are submitting to International Nursing Review, we usually say not more than 50 references. So you have to pick and choose, and you have to make sure that you use that allowance wisely. And therefore, your introduction and discussion are written together in terms of making sure that you can use those references as cleverly as possible, and these things are aligned. So that was the main stuff that you needed to do, converting your thesis into your journal article and putting that into draft. Now that the draft is ready, the whole thing is ready, the next thing that you need to do is edit, edit, edit. Okay, this is where people fail. They copy and paste and they put information into the journal article format, but then they think the job is done. The job is not done there. Writing takes less time. Editing and improving takes more time than we think. And we don't normally recognize that, and we don't normally understand that. So therefore, once you have done the first stage of having all the required section that you need, the next thing is editing, and proofreading, and making sure that it's error-free. It's a good idea to take regular breaks. So for example, if you've done your initial bit where you've converted the information from your thesis into the journal articles, and you've put that into that format, then just leave it for a couple of days, go back to it, and then start building on it, improving it, editing it, and then going back, taking break and going back and improving it. The reason for this is that when you're constantly involved into one document for a very long time, you lose the ability to find errors or spot errors. So therefore, taking a break is important, and going back to it is important. Now, one of the things that many people do is they say, well, because I need to publish it soon and I just want to submit as soon as possible. I think it's still worth it to spend more time in writing and editing and improving earlier on than rushing it to submit, waiting for the decision, getting it rejected, and starting the whole process again. So you're better off spending more time to review, revise, edit, and improve at this stage than submitting it. So make sure that you spend enough time doing that, and just take it on from there. So I've talked about the number of references, etc. So read through the author's guideline and your manuscript again to ensure you have met all the guidelines and requirements with regards to text, tables, figures, and references. So once you have completed everything and you are happy with it, make sure you go back to the author's guidelines and check your dissertation. Check your journal article again to make sure that you have met. It's clear, it's concise, it aligns with the requirement with regards to text, tables, figures, references, and everything else. And there is less chances of making errors or having things that you could have avoided earlier on. Okay, and then you need to press submit button and just wait for the results and see how that goes. So that's in a nutshell overall the process of how you should be converting your dissertation or thesis into a journal article. It's just an overview, and I'm happy to take any questions or specific issues that you are experiencing while doing your work, or you have questions that you would like to ask. So just raise your hand, and you could use your mic and we could talk. If you're, for some reason, if your microphone is not working, you could always text into the chat box, and I'll try and answer it as much as I can. Yesterday, people have been struggling to find how to raise hands. And I think if you go into more and then reaction, so it gives you that opportunity to that click which says raise hand. And it's a small group, so just open your microphone and talk. As long as we're not talking each other, I think it's fine.
Hi, can I ask a question, please? I can't get my camera to work. I'm really sorry. I've just literally had my results for my master's dissertation, and I'm thinking of obviously publishing that work. Is it what you all said so far has been really useful and really opened my mind a bit more to doing this and how I'm going to approach it. So it's been really useful. Thank you. Is it common practice to approach the journal prior to kind of doing all the work to see if it's even something they would carry? Or is it best just to kind of crack on, prepare the article and then submit?
Okay, so if you have identified 2 or 3 journals, I would still suggest that go through the process of identifying appropriate journals that you want to use. Write your abstract, kind of title and the abstracts, and have that ready. And if it makes you more comfortable asking the journal that is this something that you're going to be interested in, please do so by all means, because then at least you are not you don't keep on thinking that would that be appropriate or not, but be mindful that as an editor, so let's say if you've sent me an email asking would you be interested in this, and I look at your abstract and look at the topic and how it is written, I said, well, yes, journal potentially would be interested in this. That doesn't mean that it's going to get published. Okay, what it means is that it's in the scope of my journal. The topic is relevant, and yes, you should be writing it and you should be submitting it. The fate of an article or a manuscript and getting it published depends on the how you have written it, what messages it is conveying, and how the feedback that you get from peer reviewers and everybody else as well. So answer to your question is, yeah, there's no harm in doing that if that gives you more confidence and more information, but make sure that you send abstract as well as the title to the editor, and usually people are happy to respond back.
That's lovely, thank you. I think if it's a no, then that's probably more helpful, because not to pursue that journal, and then you can go somewhere else. So that's really helpful, thank you.
Yeah, it's usually is like you do, and I think again I would suggest that look at the author's guidelines and the scope of the journal, because that allows you to see if the study that you're doing is in the scope or not. If you think it's not, then find something else. If you're not very clear, so for example, I'll take again example of international nursing review, for instance, Journal of Advanced Nursing. Sometimes people are not very clear as to would that fit that journal, because it publishes quite, and you may have seen something similar published in there, but still not sure. In those instances, it's better to go and check and come back. And it's always useful to check, because then you're not wasting time and you can decide to go somewhere else. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Parveen, can I ask how different it would be for an editorial article? I've never submitted an article, but I want to. There's several things that I want to write about. I've just come back from an expedition in Mongolia where I checked some blood pressures and cholesterols on the nomads. So I would really like to write that up and share my findings. Would an editorial article be less valuable? Should I avoid that, or?
So I guess it depends on the purpose of you writing it as to why. If your purpose is that you are going to get a publication out of it, it's not going to be, that's not the right outcome, because yes, you can get editorial published, but that doesn't necessarily is counted in your publication. So I guess it depends on your career trajectory, who you are, what you do, and how would you find it useful. If it is about sending some information, it could be invited or otherwise editorial. If it's like, let's say you can make it much more impactful. For instance, if you've read a recent article on the type of topic that you wanted to talk about, and you can share and combine those things in there and write an editorial, by all means do that, because that allows you, that has got various benefits. It gives you confidence of writing for publication. It helps you understand the process of how to do it. It's less daunting because there are only about, it's not like research article or bigger article. So you could always do that. But again, what you could also do is have a look at the author's guidelines and see what other stuff do they publish. So again, if I take the example of International Nursing Review, we publish something called Experiences in the Field, which gives you about 2,000 words to describe using the literature and everything else. So do you want to do an editorial, or would you rather write a slightly longer article, which would kind of help that? And again, as I was saying too, I'm not sure what was the name. I think it says iPhone 3, so I'm not sure what's the name of the person I was speaking to earlier on. If you're not very clear, you could always email the journal editor to check with that. But answer to your question is, depends on why you want to write an editorial and if the journal is going to accept it. And yes, do it by all means. That's not a problem.
Thank you. I would just like to write a good quality article as first author as well, because my PhD application asks for articles as first author, and I don't have any.
Yeah, I think what you would find is like writing an article by yourself could be a bit daunting, and unless you're very self-disciplined and enjoy that kind of thing. So you may want to work with somebody and have two people write something, or want to write something smaller, as you're saying, an editorial on a specific topic, or slightly longer article on a topic which may not be a research article, but something that you really like talking about. Yeah, I would suggest again, have make an outline as to what you want to do, and try and look for the journals which could publish that sort of stuff, and see what's the best route, and write, and just ask for advice. You can always come back to me if I can be of any help. I'll be more than happy to help.
Oh, thanks very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question, please, Parveen? It's probably a tricky one.
Yeah, sure.
I've got my camera off because I flew a cold and look dreadful. But how do you decide what is a good story to tell? So if you've got a lot of data, and you're looking at a thesis, for example, and you're going, what do I tell? What are the, is it something where you've got a lot of findings, or I don't know, does something else make a good story?
So tell me what's going on in your mind. Why do you ask this question?
Well, I can think about lots of different ways lots of different things I could write from the data I've collected as part of my research. So maybe you start with the findings from a literature review. Maybe I could get into what I found when I've done some empirical work. And I'm just sort of, I suppose I find it all interesting, but how do I know what makes the most impact to other people, or what would be most interesting for them to read when you're sort of, when you've got a lot? Okay.
So how I would suggest you should do this, and sit down and write the main findings of your work. So let's say if there are, how do you know it? Because when you're writing your dissertation or thesis, and when you're collecting the data, when you're analyzing the data, you get a feel, and you don't do this in a vacuum. You've read the literature, you've spoken to people, and you know what's already out there. So you know the information about what is already out there and what is new that I'm bringing in. So that could be something that you could think of. So you already have an idea as to what's most common, what's most inspiring or surprising or different, or coming loads of time. Yeah. So yeah, you would have those sorts of things. So I think what you want to do is write those bits down in 2 to 3 sentences for each. And if you're struggling to decide as to which one you want to present, that then helps you then think through a few questions. Is there already a lot written about the topic? And am I going to add something to what's already known? How do I have anything different to say? What I'm saying is, are my thoughts clear about it? And do I feel passionate about it? So I think then that helps you determine which aspects to choose from. Usually especially with regards to PhD stuff, that you get a lot of data, and it's not easy to put that into one paper or two papers, and then you have to pick and choose as to which one shall I go for. And I think these are the few things that you need to think. And if you find any of that difficult, I think the best thing is to think about your research questions and see which points are answering your research questions easily, and publish that first, and then identify. And while doing so, you will become more clearer and more determined to write something which has come out of your study and you don't think it's available anywhere else, and to be able to write that. But if you haven't written anything before, I think go for something that you already know and where there is a structure, and your research questions and how they've been answered usually have a structure, because you've already thought through the methods, you've thought through the question, you've thought through everything else. So it will give you that structured way of writing it, which then makes it easier for you to write the next piece. Does that answer your question, Debbie?
It does. That's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope this was useful. And if you have any questions, or if I can be of any help, please do write to me as a journal editor or as a professor at the university or at DBTH, and I'll try my best to answer it. Okay.